Marcus Chen stood in his workshop atop New Shanghai's artist quarter, hands covered in stone dust as he studied his latest work. The marble sculpture before him captured a dancer in mid-leap, her form seemingly weightless despite the heavy medium. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the industrial space filled with half-finished works and raw materials from a dozen worlds. The door chimed, its tone indicating an unscheduled visitor. Marcus didn't turn immediately, too focused on the minute details of the dancer's expression. "Studios closed for commissions this month," he called out, reaching for his chisel. "Even for those who travel 50 light-years seeking your expertise." The voice that answered was like wind through crystal caves, melodious but alien. Now Marcus turned. In his doorway stood a being unlike any he'd encountered in his 15 years of interstellar art. She, for something in her voice suggested femininity, appeared to be made entirely of living crystal. Her form was humanoid but ethereal, semi-transparent, with internal facets that caught and refracted the sunlight into rainbow patterns across his workshop walls. "I'm Lyra," she said, moving into the space with liquid grace. Each movement created a subtle chiming sound, like distant wind chimes, of the crystalline collective of Arcturus. Marcus set down his tools, intrigued despite himself. He'd heard of the Arcturians. Everyone had. They were among the most enigmatic of spacefaring species, rarely venturing from their crystal cities. "Marcus Chen," he replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Though you seem to know that already." "Your reputation reaches far," Lyra said, examining the dancer sculpture. Her crystalline fingers traced the air inches from its surface. "They say you can capture the essence of movement in stone like no other artist in known space." "They say a lot of things." Marcus watched her carefully. There was something about her movements that spoke of tension, of carefully contained urgency. "Why are you really here, Lyra of Arcturus?" She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw that what he'd taken for simple transparency in her form was actually incredibly complex. Layers of crystal in varying densities created depth and texture, while trace elements provided subtle coloration, mostly blue and violet with occasional flashes of deeper purple. "I need you to sculpt me," she said simply. "But not in stone or marble or any medium you've worked with before." She held out her hand, and in her palm formed a small crystal, growing before his eyes. "I need you to learn to sculpt living crystal, to sculpt my people's very essence." Marcus stared at the crystal in her palm, his artist's mind already racing with possibilities and problems. "That's impossible. The techniques would be completely different. The tools, the approach." He shook his head. "I work with dead stone, not living crystal." "Impossible." Lyra's crystalline form chimed with what might have been amusement. "Humans are known throughout the galaxy for doing the impossible. It's why I came to you specifically, Marcus Chen. You don't just sculpt forms, you capture life in lifeless stone. I need someone who can do the opposite, bring structure and meaning to living crystal." She moved closer, and Marcus caught a subtle scent like ozone after a lightning strike. "My people are dying, Marcus. Our natural crystalline growth patterns are becoming chaotic, unstable. We need new ways of thinking, new approaches to working with our living crystal. Your human creativity, your ability to see patterns where others see only chaos, it could save us." Marcus circled her slowly, studying how light played through her form. His fingers itched to work, to understand the structure and possibility in her crystalline biology. It was madness, of course. No human had ever worked with living crystal. The techniques didn't exist. The tools hadn't been invented. The entire project was impossible. But as he looked at his dancer sculpture, at the impossible grace he'd carved from dead stone, something stirred in him. Wasn't this what human artists did? Push boundaries, find new ways to express the inexpressible. "I'll need to understand everything about how your crystal biology works," he said finally. "Every aspect of growth patterns, structural integrity, resonance frequencies. This won't be like normal sculpting. We'll be inventing an entirely new art form. Lyra's form brightened noticeably, internal facets catching the light. Then you'll help. Marcus ran a hand through his dust-covered hair, leaving streaks of white. I must be crazy, but yes, I'll help. Or at least I'll try. He gestured around his studio. We'll need to convert half this space into a crystal workshop. I'll need specialized tools, monitoring equipment. Money is no object, Lyra interjected. The collective will provide whatever resources you require. Marcus shook his head. Money isn't the main problem. The real challenge will be bridging the gap between human artistic techniques and your crystalline biology. We're not just creating art here. We're trying to develop an entirely new way of working with living matter. As if to emphasize his point, Lyra's form shimmered, internal patterns shifting in what he was beginning to recognize as an expression of emotion. Then we'll bridge that gap together, she said. Human creativity and Arcturian crystal, finding harmony in new forms. Looking at her, Marcus felt the familiar fire of artistic challenge igniting in his chest. This was more than a commission. It was a chance to push the boundaries of what was possible, to blend biology and art in ways never before attempted. It was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that humans lived for. We'll start tomorrow, he said firmly. Come at dawn. Bring whatever technical information you can about your crystal biology. And Lyra, he gestured to her shifting form. Try to keep your emotions steady. If we're going to work with living crystal, I need to understand its baseline state before we start experimenting with changes. She nodded, her form stabilizing into more regular patterns. Until dawn then, Marcus Chen. She turned to leave, then paused. Thank you for being willing to attempt the impossible. Marcus smiled slightly. That's what humans do best. After she left, Marcus stood in his workshop for a long time, watching the play of rainbow light patterns on his walls, the last traces of her presence. Tomorrow he would begin the greatest artistic challenge of his career, learning to sculpt life itself. But for now, he simply absorbed the enormity of what he'd agreed to attempt. The impossible, indeed. But then, wasn't that what art was all about? Dawn painted New Shanghai's skyline in shades of amber when Lyra returned to Marcus's studio. She found it transformed. Half the space had been cleared and repurposed with strange equipment. Crystalline sensors from her homeworld sat alongside human scanning devices and traditional sculpting tools modified with what looked like sonic emitters. Marcus stood at a workbench, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. I've been studying the technical data you sent, he said without preamble. The way your crystal matrices respond to emotional and psychological states is fascinating. It's almost like they're an external manifestation of internal harmony or discord. Lyra's form shimmered with approval. Yes, our crystal structures are intimately linked to our consciousness. That's part of why the growing instability is so concerning. It's not just physical. It's affecting our very way of thinking. Marcus picked up what looked like a modified chisel. I have some theories about that. Your people's traditional crystal shaping techniques are all based on internal resonance, using your natural connection to the crystal to guide its growth. But that's become a closed loop, reinforcing existing patterns. He gestured to his tools. What if we introduced external influences, new frequencies, new patterns? That would be. Lyra's form flickered with uncertainty. Unprecedented. Our crystal forms have always been shaped from within. Exactly. Marcus's eyes lit with excitement. You came to me for human creativity. Well, this is it. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to break old patterns. He held up a small crystal sample she had provided. May I? Lyra nodded, though her form betrayed her nervousness through subtle pattern shifts. Marcus activated his modified chisel, which emitted a barely audible hum. When he brought it near the crystal, new patterns began forming within, crude and chaotic at first, but with hints of intentional structure. It's responding. Lyra moved closer, her own crystal form resonating slightly with the frequencies. But the patterns are so different from our traditional forms. That's just the beginning, Marcus said, adjusting the frequency. Watch this. He touched the crystal with a tuning fork of his own design, and the chaotic patterns suddenly aligned into a simple but elegant spiral. It's about finding the right harmonic frequencies, like a conductor leading an orchestra. For hours they experimented, Marcus testing different tools and techniques, while Lyra provided insights into crystal properties and growth patterns. Sometimes their attempts produced nothing but discordant structures that quickly collapse. Other times, they achieved moments of startling beauty, new patterns that neither human art nor Arcturian crystal had ever expressed before. The key, Marcus mused during a break, is understanding that this isn't just sculpture. It's more like teaching the crystal to dance to a new rhythm. We're not imposing form, we're suggesting possibilities. Lyra's form had been growing more animated as they worked, her internal patterns shifting with increasing complexity. It's remarkable. These new patterns, they feel alien to me, yet somehow right, like discovering a new color. Marcus studied her thoughtfully. Would you be willing to try something? A direct experiment with your own crystal matrix. Her form stilled. You want to attempt shaping living crystal while it's still part of me. The idea clearly both frightened and intrigued her. That would be intimate, potentially dangerous. We'll start small, Marcus assured her. Just a tiny surface pattern on one arm. At the first sign of discomfort, we stop. He held up his modified tools. Think of it as a test run. We need to understand how living, conscious crystal responds to these techniques. After a long moment, Lyra extended her arm. Proceed. But Marcus, her form chimed softly. Be gentle. Marcus selected his finest tools and began working with the lightest of touches. He combined sonic frequencies with minimal physical contact, watching in fascination as new patterns formed in Lyra's crystalline structure. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced. The crystal responded not just to his tools, but to his intentions, creating flowing designs that seemed to bridge human aesthetics and Arcturian crystal physics. How does it feel? He asked, pausing to study the results. Strange, Lyra whispered, but not unpleasant. It's like hearing music in a new key. The patterns you're creating, they resonate with frequencies I didn't know I could produce. Encouraged, Marcus continued working, his artistic instincts guiding him to blend traditional sculptural aesthetics with the natural growth patterns of living crystal. The design that emerged was neither purely human nor purely Arcturian, but something new, a harmony of both approaches. Look, Lyra said softly, holding her arm up to the morning light. The pattern caught the sunlight and refracted it in complex ways, creating dancing rainbows that seemed to follow the flow of the design. It's beautiful, different from anything in our traditional arts, yet it feels right. Marcus set down his tools, satisfied with this first experiment. This is just the beginning. Now that we understand the basic principles, we can start developing more complex techniques. But more importantly, he gestured to her arm. We've proved it's possible. Human artistic vision can work in harmony with living crystal. Lyra's entire form seemed to glow with excitement. We need to document everything. The frequencies, the techniques, the psychological components. My people will need to understand not just the how, but the why, the artistic philosophy behind these new patterns. Agreed. Marcus was already sketching notes, but we should also be careful. These techniques could be dangerous in the wrong hands. We're not just creating art. We're developing ways to influence the very substance of your people's being. You understand, then? Lyra's form shimmered. Why this had to be more than just a technical solution. We needed someone who would grasp both the artistry and the responsibility. Marcus nodded slowly. Art has always had the power to change how people think, how they see themselves and their world. With these techniques, that power becomes literal. He looked at her thoughtfully. We're breaking boundaries here, Lyra. Not just between species, but between art and life itself. Then we'll need to be wise as well as creative, she replied. Shall we continue? Marcus checked his tools, mind already racing with new possibilities. Let's see what other boundaries we can break. News of Marcus and Lyra's experiments spread through the artistic community like ripples in still water. 3 weeks into their collaboration, their studio had become a point of controversy. Traditional sculptors dismissed their work as a gimmick, while xenobiologists demanded access to their techniques for study. But in their workshop, focused on their breakthrough, Marcus and Lyra barely noticed the growing storm. There's something we're missing, Marcus muttered, studying a failed attempt at a complex pattern. The crystal sample before him had started promisingly but collapsed into discord. The resonance is almost there, but it's not quite stable. Lyra moved closer, her own crystal form humming with thoughtful frequencies. Over their weeks of work, she'd grown more expressive, her internal patterns shifting with increasingly subtle variations. Perhaps we're thinking too linearly. My people's crystal matrices don't just grow in 3 dimensions. They exist in a quantum state of potential forms. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, leaving traces of crystal dust that caught the light. Show me. Use your own form as an example. Lyra held out her hand, and Marcus watched in fascination as the crystal structure of her palm seemed to shift through multiple possible configurations while maintaining its basic form. It was like watching water freeze in multiple patterns simultaneously. That's it, he breathed. We've been trying to impose single patterns, but we need to create resonant frequencies that support multiple stable states. He reached for his modified tools, then hesitated. May I? Their work had made them both more aware of the intimacy involved in shaping living crystal. Lyra nodded, extending her arm. I trust you. Marcus began working with new insight, combining frequencies in complex harmonies. Where before he had tried to create specific patterns, now he focused on establishing fields of resonance that could support multiple crystalline states. Under his guidance, patterns emerged that seemed to shift and flow while maintaining perfect stability. It's like Lyra's voice held wonder, like finding a new way to breathe. These patterns, they don't constrain the crystal's natural tendencies, they enhance them. Exactly. Marcus's eyes shone with excitement. We're not forcing the crystal into new forms. We're creating environments that encourage healthy growth patterns. It's more like gardening than traditional sculpture. Their breakthrough was interrupted by the studio's security system. Director Kane of the Earth Arts Council requests entry, the AI announced. Marcus and Lyra exchanged glances. They'd been declining official visitors, but they couldn't ignore the council forever. Allow entry, Marcus sighed. Director Kane swept in, a tall woman in severe traditional dress. Her augmented eyes scanned the studio, taking in the modified equipment and experimental setups. Mr. Chen, we've been following your experiments with concern. Director. Marcus kept his voice neutral. What brings the council to my studio? Reports of unauthorized xenobiological art techniques. Manipulation of sentient crystalline matrices without proper oversight. The council has standards, Mr. Chen. Protocols that exist for good reason. With respect, Marcus gestured to Lyra. My work with the Arcturian Collective is fully authorized by their government. The techniques we're developing are dangerous, Kane interrupted. You're manipulating the fundamental structure of a sentient species. This goes beyond art into restricted technological territory. Lyra's form chimed with subtle discord. You misunderstand. Marcus isn't manipulating our essence. He's helping us find new ways to grow, to heal. So you claim. Kane's augmented eyes focused on Lyra, but our experts suggest these techniques could be weaponized, used to destabilize crystalline life forms. The Council cannot allow uncontrolled development of such potentially dangerous methods. Marcus stepped forward, anger rising. This is art, Director. Revolutionary art that could save an entire species. Your experts are so focused on potential dangers they're missing the beauty of what we're creating. Art. Kane's laugh was cold. Look at this place. It's more laboratory than studio. You've strayed far from sculpture, Mr. Chen. Have I? Marcus reached for a small crystal sample. Watch. His hands moved with practiced precision, tools humming with complex harmonies. The crystal responded, growing into a form of impossible delicacy, a flowering pattern that seemed to bloom and rebirth itself endlessly. This is sculpture, Director. Living sculpture that grows and changes while maintaining perfect artistic unity. We're not just shaping crystal, we're teaching it to dance. Even Kane's augmented eyes widened at the display. Impressive parlor tricks. But the Council's decision stands. You have 1 week to submit your techniques for review and certification. After that, any unauthorized crystal manipulation will result in the revocation of your artistic license. After she left, Marcus slumped against his workbench. They don't understand. They're trying to regulate this like it's technology, but it's so much more. Lyra moved to his side, her form radiating gentle harmonies. Then we'll make them understand, not through arguments or demonstrations, but through art so beautiful it transcends their fears. Her crystal structure shifted, creating patterns that complemented and enhanced the natural light in the studio. Look at what we can do together, Marcus. This isn't just about saving my people anymore. It's about showing both our species new possibilities. Marcus straightened, studying their latest successful piece. You're right. Art has always faced opposition when it breaks new ground. But true creativity can't be contained by regulations or fears. He turned to her, eyes bright with determination. We have 1 week to create something unprecedented, something that will show them the true potential of what we're developing. A masterwork, Lyra agreed, her form brightening. But what? Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. Something that combines everything we've learned, not just pattern and resonance, but the living, growing aspect of your crystal nature. He began pacing, mind racing. A piece that starts simple but grows more complex over time, following the harmonies we establish. A crystal garden that blooms with consciousness and artistic intent. Yes, Lyra's form chimed with excitement. And I will be part of it, not just subject or medium, but co-creator, human, and Arcturian in perfect artistic synthesis. As they began planning their masterwork, neither noticed the small drone outside their window, recording everything. In offices and laboratories across the city, others were very interested in their discoveries, for reasons that had nothing to do with art. The attack came at midnight. Marcus was working late, refining harmonics for their masterwork, when the studio's security systems suddenly went dark. He had just enough time to trigger the emergency protocols before shadowy figures breached the workspace. They moved with military precision, heading straight for the experimental equipment. Not simple thieves then. They knew exactly what they were after. Marcus grabbed his most crucial tools and retreated toward the secret room he'd installed after Kane's visit, the one containing their most important discoveries. I wouldn't. A voice from the shadows. A figure stepped forward, holding something that pulsed with dangerous energy. Those are some fascinating resonance patterns you've developed, Shen. Imagine them reversed. Turn destructive instead of creative. One blast could shatter every crystal structure in this room. Marcus froze, mind racing. They'd theorized about harmful applications of their techniques, but hadn't thought anyone else would discover the potential so quickly. Who are you? Does it matter? We're just one of many interested parties. Your little art project has implications far beyond sculpture. The figure gestured to the others, who were efficiently packing up equipment. The resonance technology alone is worth fortunes. The military applications, well, it's not technology, Marcus said firmly. It's art. A collaboration between species to create something beautiful. How noble. The voice dripped sarcasm. But let's be realistic. You've discovered a way to manipulate crystalline structures at their most fundamental level. Did you really think people wouldn't notice the strategic value? A subtle shimmer in the air behind the intruders caught Marcus's attention. He kept talking, buying time. You don't understand. These techniques require artistic intuition, emotional resonance. You can't just. We have labs full of scientists who'll crack your artistic intuition soon enough. The leader stepped closer. Now about those backup files. The shimmer coalesced into Lyra's form, but different than Marcus had ever seen her. Her crystal structure was configured into sharp defensive patterns, refracting light in ways that made her nearly invisible. She'd come in through the secret entrance they'd installed for emergencies. You should have studied our art more carefully. Lyra's voice rang out, each word creating harmonics that made the intruder's equipment vibrate. Then you'd understand that Arcturian crystal can't be controlled, only collaborated with. The leader spun, raising the threatening device, but Lyra was already moving. Her crystal form resonated at frequencies she and Marcus had discovered together, creating patterns that disrupted electronic equipment. Screens flickered, tools sparked, and the weapon emitted a dying whine. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He activated the studio's backup systems, not the standard security, but specialized sonic emitters they'd developed for their work. The harmonics weren't dangerous to organic matter, but every crystalline structure in the room began resonating with chaotic energy. The intruder's stolen equipment overloaded, forcing them to drop it or risk injury. Even their advanced tech couldn't handle the complex frequencies bouncing around the room. In the confusion, Lyra moved among them like a living prism, her form refracting light in dazzling patterns that made it impossible to track her movements. Art, she announced, her voice harmonizing with the sonic patterns, is not a weapon to be stolen. It's a dialogue between creator and medium, between species and possibilities. Her form shifted through a series of breathtaking configurations that Marcus had helped her develop. This is what you fail to understand. Our techniques require partnership, understanding, mutual growth. Security drones were finally approaching. The real ones this time, summoned by their backup systems. The intruders knew it too. This isn't over, their leader snarled, signaling retreat. That technology will be replicated. No, Marcus said quietly, standing beside Lyra. It won't, because you're still thinking like thieves and soldiers, seeing only the surface patterns. He gestured to where their masterwork was growing in its special chamber, each crystal formation more complex and beautiful than the last. This is about creation, not control, about finding harmony between different forms of life. After the authorities had come and gone, taking statements and collecting evidence, Marcus and Lyra surveyed the damage to their studio. Most of their standard equipment was destroyed, but their core research and art pieces were safe in the shielded room. They'll try again, Lyra noted, her form still showing traces of the defensive patterns she'd manifested. Others too, now that they know it's possible. Marcus nodded, already planning modifications to their security. Then we'll be ready. But more importantly, we'll show them why their approach will never work. He touched a crystal formation gently, sending harmonious ripples through its structure. Real art can't be stolen or weaponized. It has to grow from understanding. Lyra's form shifted closer to his, their resonances aligning in ways they'd discovered through their work together. The council hearing is tomorrow. After this, they'll be even more determined to shut us down. Let them try. Marcus smiled, watching the play of light through her crystalline form. We'll show them something so beautiful, so undeniably positive, that they'll have to recognize the truth. This isn't about weapons or power. It's about bringing worlds together through art. He gestured to their masterwork in progress. Look at how it's growing, each pattern building on the last. That's what they don't understand. You can't force this kind of creation. It has to emerge from harmony between artist and medium, between species and cultures, between heart and crystal. Lyra suggested, her form chiming with what Marcus now recognized as amusement. Exactly. He began gathering tools that had survived the attack. Come on, we've got work to do before tomorrow. Let's show them what real collaboration between humans and Arcturians can create. As they worked through the night, their harmonies grew stronger, more complex. Each new pattern they created was a testament to the power of art to bridge divides, to find beauty in difference, and to transform understanding into something greater than either species could achieve alone. The thieves had wanted to steal their techniques, never realizing that the real magic wasn't in the tools or frequencies. It was in the connection between human creativity and crystalline consciousness, between art and life itself. That was something that couldn't be stolen or replicated. It could only be grown, nurtured, and shared. The Grand Exhibition Hall of New Shanghai had never seen anything like it. The entire central chamber had been transformed into a crystalline garden, living artworks growing and evolving in perfect harmony. At its heart stood Marcus and Lyra's masterwork, a towering crystal formation that seemed to dance with light and possibility. "The council members are arriving," Marcus noted, making final adjustments to the resonance fields. He looked exhausted but satisfied after their weeks of preparation. "Ready?" Lyra's form shimmered with anticipation. "They expect us to present a technical defense of our work. Let's show them something more profound instead." The exhibition space filled with dignitaries, critics, and representatives from a dozen worlds. Director Kane led the Earth Arts Council delegation, her augmented eyes scanning everything with suspicious intensity. Alongside them stood members of the Arcturian Collective, their crystalline forms reflecting the ambient light. Marcus stepped forward to address the gathering. "You've come expecting a demonstration of techniques, a justification of our methods. Instead, we offer you something else, a vision of what's possible when barriers between species fall away." He gestured, and the lighting shifted. The central crystal formation began to pulse with subtle harmonies, patterns flowing and evolving in response to the resonance fields they'd established. But this was just the beginning. Lyra moved to join him, her own crystal form entering into harmony with the sculpture. "What you're seeing isn't just art or technology. It's a conversation between forms of life, between ways of being." Her structure began shifting through increasingly complex patterns, each one enhancing and being enhanced by the larger formation. Marcus activated the next phase of their presentation. Small crystal seeds throughout the chamber began growing, each following unique but harmonious patterns. "Every piece you see is alive, growing according to both natural crystal physics and artistic intent. We're not controlling these formations, we're collaborating with them." The audience watched in stunned silence as the entire room became a symphony of light and crystal. Patterns flowed like water, shifted like wind, yet maintained perfect structural integrity. It was art that lived and breathed, that responded to its environment while following its own internal harmony. "Impossible," one of the council members whispered. "The energy requirements alone." "Look closer," Lyra suggested. She moved through the garden, touching formations gently. Where her crystal form made contact, new patterns emerged, spreading and evolving. These structures sustain themselves through the same principles that govern all crystalline life. We've simply shown them new ways to grow. Marcus joined her, adding his own influences to the patterns. Human and Arcturian working in perfect synchronization, their different approaches creating something greater than either could achieve alone. "This is what we've discovered, not just new artistic techniques, but a way to bridge the gap between organic and crystalline life." Director Kane stepped forward, her expression conflicted. "It's beautiful, I'll grant you that, but the security implications are precisely why this shouldn't be classified as weapon technology," Marcus interrupted. "What you're seeing requires harmony, understanding, mutual growth. Try to force these patterns." He deliberately introduced a discordant frequency. The nearby crystals shuddered and reverted to simpler forms. The art rejects control. It can only be created through collaboration. The Arcturian representatives moved closer, their own forms resonating with the displays. "We came seeking solutions to our people's crystal degradation," their leader announced. "Instead, we found something far more valuable, a new way of understanding our own nature." The exhibition continued, with Marcus and Lyra demonstrating increasingly complex interactions between human artistic vision and crystalline consciousness. They showed how their techniques could heal damaged crystal structures, guide healthy growth patterns, and create sustainable new forms that honored both species' traditions. "This is only the beginning," Lyra explained as the presentation reached its climax. These principles could be applied to architecture, healing arts, environmental restoration, anywhere that requires harmony between different forms of life. The final demonstration brought everything together. Marcus and Lyra, working in perfect unity, created a living sculpture that captured their journey, from first tentative experiments to their current mastery. The piece grew and evolved before the audience's eyes, each stage more beautiful than the last. "We stand at a crossroads," Marcus addressed the silent crowd. "We can treat this discovery as something to be feared and controlled, or we can recognize it as an opportunity to grow beyond our current limitations." He gestured to the crystal garden surrounding them. "Every piece here represents a possibility, a future where different species don't just coexist, but create together." The council deliberated for hours, but in the end, the sheer beauty and positive potential of their work couldn't be denied. Instead of restrictions, they received a mandate to establish an interstellar arts institute dedicated to exploring and developing their techniques. Later, alone in their studio, Marcus and Lyra stood before their original workbench, where it all began. "Did you ever imagine," she asked, her form shimmering with joy, "that your human sculpting could lead to this?" Marcus smiled, watching the play of light through her crystalline structure, so much more complex and expressive than when they'd first met. Humans have always dreamed of reaching the stars, of finding new ways to connect with different forms of life. He touched a crystal formation gently, sending harmonious ripples through its structure. "We just needed the right partners to help us turn those dreams into reality." And now, Lyra's form shifted closer, their resonances aligning in the way that had become so natural. "Now we keep creating, keep exploring." Marcus gestured to their studio, already being renovated to accommodate students from both their species. "There are so many possibilities we haven't even discovered yet, so many new harmonies to find." Above them, through the studio's skylight, stars twinkled in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, their art was already spreading, inspiring others to look past differences and find new ways to grow together. It wasn't just a legacy in crystal and stone they were creating, but a legacy in the stars themselves. Proof that when barriers fell away, beauty could flourish in forms no one had ever imagined.